a couple of years back, I had a client that we were talking to and starting to explore, and he was doing some groundbreaking research on cancer and a solution that could solve 4 different cancers potentially, or at least lead to early identification. And he went out and did a charitable 10K run and did not come back that afternoon. Within 2 months, without that being in place, the business was dead because there was no funding mechanism to find the successor or to figure out how do you prop up the business in the interim. A lot of folks that had invested in that, it was unfortunate, first of all, that he passed, especially he was doing such groundbreaking work, but now also a lot of folks lost investment in him.
Yeah, exactly. And scenarios like that happen more often than people think. So it's definitely something to think about and make sure you plan for the unforeseen circumstances.
Yeah, and I remember as well, there was also someone else in the event of a disability where I can't remember if it was one of yours or one of Brian's clients, but had an issue with migraines. And because of the nature of the work, they were so heavily looking at screens all day long, it severely inhibited their ability to do all the computer-related work that they needed to do. Crazy things like that can now all of a sudden dismantle a business's fantastic design and efforts. So talk a bit about how those can be structured.
Yeah, so there could be multiple disability policies in place on the business front. There's some that are for the founder themselves to make sure that they're covered in case something were to happen to them, that they can move on with their lives and still have their salary, or in this case, it would be a supplemental income policy. And then there are some that would be in place for the business, similar to life insurance, where it makes sure that a founder or a key person or somebody that's integral to the business is covered, so that if they aren't able to work, the business can use those funds to hire their replacement, once again, to buy time through the readjustment period and figure out internally what things need to change. Those are some of the ways that that works.
Yep. Great insights. Well, and also, I know one of the things that you come across with a lot of the folks you're working with is, the impacts of dilution, especially if they don't have the liquidity, or if it's a partial exit where they're starting to give up some equity shares as they're seeking new capital. Talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different scenarios where founders want to partially exit, or maybe we talked about spousal divorce earlier. Maybe the co-founders have a co-founder divorce and split ways in terms of which trajectories they want to go with the business. And so what that can cause, because most founders don't have a buy-sell agreement in place, and even if they do have a buy-sell agreement in place, they probably don't have a funding mechanism for all these different scenarios. That can cause the business to get tied up in legal battles if the founders disagree on the valuation methodology of, hey, I want to exit the business, he's agreed to buy my shares, but I think it's worth this much, the other founder thinks it's worth this much, so that legal battle could end up dragging the business down with it. Sometimes founders simply just burn out and they've had enough. They want to get out. Maybe they still want to hold some equity, but they don't want to put in the effort anymore, and that can lead to problems as well with the other founder if that's not like, hey, that's not a part of our agreement. We're both supposed to be all in on this. And so that can cause, then maybe that founder could sell to a third party, and all of a sudden the co-founders in business with a third party they weren't expecting to be in business with, and maybe they don't actually want that. They want the right to buy the co-founder shares instead of letting them sell it to just the highest bidder. And yeah, sometimes there's certain life liquidity events that happen. Some of those are the ones that we mentioned before, or it could be major purchases that a founder wants to make that causes them to dilute their shares without the co-founders' express consent. And not that there's often a legal issue with that, but that could be just a problem in terms of how the co-founders work. And once again, it could lead to someone else becoming the decision maker of that founder's company.
Absolutely. I know we've seen that in some cases as well, where having that clarity can really just streamline the transitions, even if it's a bumpy transition, just having clarity and clear ground rules set. I know we talk a lot about it's often better to set those ground rules on the front end while everybody's still friends, everybody's still enthusiastic, and to say what seems fair. But I think to your point, let's say if you and I were business together and I say, hey, I'm out of here, I want 10 million for my shares of the business, and you say it's not worth more than 2. Now we're going to have a fight for a while, and it's going to go on, and like you said, drag the business through just a lot of messy exit in a lot of ways.
It's like, decide how you're going to break up while you still like each other.
Exactly. Much easier to do that and shape the cement while it's still wet versus coming in with the jackhammer and having to break it up later once it's all hardened and solidified.
Yeah.
Yeah, good insights. Well, and I think also with that, how about in the event of, there's an employee poaching? I know there was one example that we've seen where someone walked off with the intellectual property of the business.
Yeah, exactly. So worked with somebody who they had a co-founder slash employee. It was a co-founder that was the main developer with a low percentage of equity, and they just got a better deal from a competitor to get actual co-founder status with a larger chunk of equity in the company as an actual partner. And although they weren't technically allowed to take the IP with them, since these were both startups, neither really had the money to fight like a long legal battle. And even in that, sometimes NDAs don't hold up in certain states very well, depending on the state you're in. So even though they weren't technically allowed to take the IP with them, they basically did. And that led to an issue where then the founder doesn't have their main developer. They don't really have the same company trajectory without them, but they're not able to pursue the other company legally. And even if they were, it would just end in both companies' demises. It wouldn't really benefit him very much. That can happen a lot to founders where your key employee gets poached, and it's good to have some sort of protections in place, not only if they get poached, but also in the scenarios we said before, like death, disability, sickness. Want to make sure that if something happens to a key employee, the business can move forward. And in the case of employee poaching, maybe there's some other key person planning or benefits that you can put in place that incentivizes them to stay, whether it's stock vesting or compensation packages or any other number of benefits that key employee might want.
Exactly. Yeah, some great ways we can design those and have some cliff vesting on them and things like that, so that it continues to, as we refer to it, golden handcuff them to the business, so that there's a real incentive for them to stay, or there's something significant to lose if they transition in an untoward fashion. And so I think that makes a ton of sense. So as we talked about some of the personal planning and then the transition planning, there obviously can be some of those things that we've just started alluding to around, what are those business benefits in the planning? Where is the sweet spot of being both employer and employee, and especially for some of those key people that you were just talking about?
Yeah, exactly. When you're thinking about the key employee benefits, it's actually a great example of kind of the natural next question is how do we design the company's financial system to support both the business and the humans inside of it? And so those key person benefits are a great example of that, making sure that those key employees are taken care of. And then once again, if we refer back to the personal planning, and like you just said, the founder themselves is in the sweet spot of employer and employee. So how do you design some executive benefits or other business benefits that can benefit them as well? Once again, for the business, for themselves, and for their future goals on both sides of things.